In the quiet neighborhood of Montevideo, Uruguay, a man named Kim Jae-sung sat in his small apartment, surrounded by scattered photographs and yellowed documents. The walls were covered with maps, red strings connecting various locations, telling a story of a hunt that had lasted decades. Herbert Cukurs was not just another name on a list. He was a monster who had walked the streets of Riga during World War II, leaving behind a trail of unimaginable horror. During the Nazi occupation of Latvia, Cukurs had been more than a collaborator. He was an active participant in the systematic murder of Jewish people. Jae-sung remembered the stories told by survivors, how Cukurs would personally lead groups of Jews to remote locations, how he smiled while overseeing mass executions, how he earned the nickname the Butcher of Riga. Each photograph before him represented a life destroyed, a family erased from existence. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting shadows on the documents. Jae-sung's fingers traced the edges of a black and white photograph, showing Cukurs in his younger years, a handsome man with a pilot's cap, standing next to a small aircraft. Before the war, he had been a respected aviator in Latvia, admired for his flying skills. But beneath that charming exterior lurked a darkness that would consume thousands of innocent lives. Mossad had been tracking Cukurs for years. After the war, like many Nazi collaborators, he had escaped to South America. Brazil first, then Uruguay. Always moving, always hiding, believing time would wash away his crimes. But for the Jewish people, and especially for Mossad, time did not heal. It only sharpened the resolve for justice. Park Yoon-hee, Jae-sung's colleague, had spent months building a comprehensive profile of Cukurs. Her research was meticulous, documenting his daily routine, his contacts, his movements. She knew exactly where he bought his bread, which mechanic shop he frequented, and the routes he took through Montevideo. The team's mission was clear. Cukurs would not live out his days in peaceful anonymity. He would answer for his crimes, even if it meant an extrajudicial execution. Jae-sung opened a worn notebook, filled with handwritten notes and sketches. Each page represented a piece of a complex puzzle. The plan was not just about killing a man, but about sending a message to the world. Those who committed atrocities would never truly escape. In the early days of their investigation, they had interviewed survivors, old men and women, their eyes, still carrying the pain of memories decades old, would describe Cukurs with a mixture of fear and anger. They spoke of how he didn't just kill. He took pleasure in humiliation, in showing absolute power over helpless people. One survivor, an elderly woman in Tel Aviv, had told Jae-sung about a day in 1941 when Cukurs personally led a group of Jewish families to a forest outside Riga. Her voice trembled as she described how he laughed while people begged for their lives. She had lost her entire family that day, parents, siblings, a young husband, and 2 small children. The weight of these stories drove Jae-sung and his team. They were not just agents. They were carriers of a collective pain, guardians of a promise made after the Holocaust. Never again. Uruguay in the 1960s was different from wartime Latvia. Here, Cukurs lived a quiet life, believing he had successfully hidden his past. He worked as a mechanic, lived in a small house, and rarely drew attention to himself. But Mossad's eyes were always watching, always calculating. Jae-sung knew that this mission was about more than revenge. It was about justice, about ensuring that history would remember not just the crimes, but the consequences. Every Nazi collaborator who thought they could escape would understand that their past would eventually catch up with them. As the day progressed, Jae-sung continued to review the plans. Every detail mattered. The location of the operation, the approach, the method. Everything needed to be perfect. They were not just planning an assassination. They were executing a carefully choreographed act of historical reckoning. Outside, the Uruguayan sun continued its slow arc across the sky. Unaware of the momentous events being planned in this small, quiet apartment, Herbert Cukurs, the Butcher of Riga, had no idea that his past was about to dramatically collide with his present. The morning was crisp and cool when Park Yoon-hee spread her surveillance photographs across the small wooden table. Each image captured Herbert Cukurs moving through Montevideo, seemingly unaware of the shadows tracking his every move. She had been watching him for months, learning his habits, understanding his patterns. Cukurs lived a careful life. Every Tuesday, he would visit the local mechanic shop on Calle Sarandi. He would wear a light blue shirt, always pressed and clean, and carry a worn leather briefcase. The shop owner, an older man named Roberto, knew him simply as a reliable customer who understood machinery. What Roberto didn't know was that Cukurs carried more than just tools in his briefcase. He carried the weight of thousands of murdered souls, the memories of his brutal past in Riga carefully hidden beneath a veneer of ordinary life. Jae-sung studied the photographs with intense concentration. Each image told a story. Cukurs buying bread at the local bakery, walking his small terrier in the neighborhood park, purchasing newspapers at the corner store. To anyone watching casually, he was just another aging immigrant trying to live a quiet life in South America. But Mossad knew better. They had spent years tracking Nazi collaborators who escaped justice after World War II. Cukurs was not just another target. He was a symbol of the brutality that had nearly destroyed an entire people. The team's intelligence revealed a carefully constructed life. Cukurs had arrived in Brazil in 1945, using rat lines, secret routes used by Nazi war criminals, to escape Europe. He had forged documents, created a new identity, and slowly built a life far from the scenes of his terrible crimes. Yoon-hee had discovered something interesting in her recent investigations. Cukurs occasionally met with other European immigrants, men who spoke in hushed tones and avoided direct eye contact. These meetings were brief, carefully orchestrated, always in public spaces where they could blend into the crowd. Lee Seok-woo, the team's most experienced operative, began preparing their approach. He would create a false identity, a Brazilian aircraft mechanic interested in Cukurs' past aviation experience. The plan was to build trust slowly, to get close enough to execute their mission with precision. The team knew the risks. An operation like this could easily go wrong. International laws were complicated, and Uruguay was not always cooperative with Israeli intelligence. They would need to be perfect in every detail. Cukurs' daily routine was almost mathematical in its precision. He would wake at 6:30 a.m., have coffee at the same cafe, read the morning newspaper, and then proceed to work or run errands. His predictability would be his weakness. Historical records showed that Cukurs was responsible for the murder of approximately 30,000 Jews in Latvia during the Holocaust. He wasn't just a passive participant. He had personally led execution squads, taking pleasure in his role as a murderer. Survivors who had escaped his brutality in Riga still carried the scars. Their testimonies were filled with descriptions of a man who seemed to enjoy causing pain, who smiled while destroying families, who represented the worst of human cruelty. Jae-sung remembered an old photograph of Cukurs from before the war, a handsome pilot, respected in Latvian aviation circles. How could such a man transform into a monster? The question haunted the team, a reminder of humanity's potential for darkness. Their plan was carefully constructed. They would not just kill Cukurs. They would ensure that his death would send a message to other war criminals hiding around the world. Mossad's reach was long, and justice had no expiration date. Seok-woo began preparing his cover story. He would be Carlos Silva, a Brazilian aircraft enthusiast interested in local aviation history. His background was meticulously crafted. Documents, references, a history that would withstand even the most careful scrutiny. The team worked in silence, each member understanding the weight of their mission. This was more than an assassination. This was about honoring the memories of those who could not defend themselves, about showing that even decades after the war, those who committed atrocities would not escape accountability. As the day progressed, Cukurs continued his routine, completely unaware that his past was about to catch up with him. The gathering storm was approaching, quiet but inevitable, ready to deliver a judgment long delayed but never forgotten. The mission was set. The hunters were ready. The prey had no idea what was coming. The mechanic shop was quiet that morning when Seokwu first introduced himself to Cukurs. He spoke with a carefully practiced Brazilian Portuguese accent, his movements relaxed but calculated. Carlos Silva, his carefully constructed persona, was a young aircraft enthusiast interested in local aviation history. Cukurs looked up from the engine he was repairing, his weathered hands covered in grease. Something about the younger man's approach seemed genuine, a shared passion for machinery, a respect for technical skill. They began talking about old aircraft, the kind that had flown in the years before and during the war. At first, their conversations were brief. Seokwu would visit the shop, ask questions about engines, share stories about imaginary aircraft restoration projects. He was building trust, layer by careful layer. Cukurs seemed to enjoy having someone listen to his technical knowledge, someone who showed genuine interest in his expertise. The team had prepared meticulously. Yoonhee had created an entire backstory, documents showing Carlos Silva's supposed work in Brazilian aviation circles, photographs, references that would withstand careful investigation. Every detail was perfect. Every potential question had been anticipated. Weeks passed. Cukurs began to look forward to Seokwu's visits. They would drink coffee together, talk about mechanical details, share stories about different aircraft models. To anyone watching, they appeared to be developing a genuine friendship. But beneath the surface, everything was carefully calculated. Each conversation was a chess move, each shared moment a step closer to the ultimate goal. Seokwu was gathering information, understanding Cukurs' daily routine, his habits, his vulnerabilities. The old mechanic talked about his past, but carefully. He mentioned travels, his work, but never directly addressed the years during the war. Seokwu knew this. Was intentional. A man with something to hide always speaks in careful half-truths. One afternoon, during a conversation about old aircraft, Cukurs showed Seokwu photographs from his earlier years. There were pictures of planes, of landscapes, of a life that seemed almost normal. But Seokwu recognized something in his eyes, a darkness that could not be hidden by time or distance. Jae-sung and Yoonhee monitored every interaction. They listened to recordings, analyzed every word, every gesture. The infiltration was working perfectly. Cukurs was becoming comfortable, lowering his guard with each passing week. The team knew the risks. One wrong move could destroy everything. International laws were complex, and an unauthorized execution could create diplomatic nightmares. They needed to be perfect. Cukurs began inviting Seokwu to his home. Small gatherings, casual meetings where they would discuss machinery, share meals. Each invitation was an opportunity, each moment a step closer to their ultimate goal. The neighborhood where Cukurs lived was quiet, filled with immigrants who had come to South America seeking new lives. Most were honest people looking for peace. But some, like Cukurs, carried dark secrets hidden beneath ordinary exteriors. Seokwu learned about Cukurs' daily routine, his morning walks, his favorite coffee shop, the routes he took through the city. Every detail was carefully noted, every movement mapped and understood. As trust grew, Cukurs began to share more personal stories. He spoke about his life before the war, his days as a pilot, his travels. But he always avoided discussing the years of occupation, the time when he earned his terrible nickname. The team knew they were walking a dangerous line. Too much pressure could make Cukurs suspicious. Too little, and they might lose their opportunity for justice. Each interaction was a delicate balance of information and restraint. Months of careful preparation were coming together. The infiltration was working perfectly. Cukurs saw Seokwu as a friend, someone he could trust. He had no idea that every conversation, every shared moment was bringing him closer to a reckoning he had managed to avoid for 2 decades. Jae-sung reviewed the latest reports. The plan was almost ready. Soon, very soon, they would move. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and justice would finally find the butcher of Riga. The neighborhood continued its quiet existence, unaware of the drama unfolding. An old mechanic and a young aircraft enthusiast continued their friendship, their conversations filled with stories of machines and travel. But beneath the surface, something much bigger was taking shape. A mission of justice, decades in the EO making. The night was dark and humid when everything changed. Seokwoo had invited Cukurs to a small warehouse on the outskirts of Montevideo, promising to show him a rare aircraft engine he had recently acquired. Cukurs, always eager to discuss machinery, agreed without hesitation. Jae-sung and Yoon-hee were positioned carefully, watching every movement. Years of planning had led to this single moment. The warehouse was isolated, perfect for their purpose. No witnesses, no complications. Cukurs arrived in his old blue sedan, parking carefully near the warehouse entrance. He carried his usual leather briefcase, walking with the confidence of a man who believed he was safe. He had no idea that safety was an illusion he had maintained for far too long. Seokwoo greeted him at the door, dressed in mechanic's overalls. The warehouse smelled of old metal and oil, filled with various machine parts and forgotten equipment. Cukurs looked around, impressed by the collection of machinery. "I found something interesting," Seokwoo said in his practiced Portuguese. "An old aircraft engine from the 1940s. Would you like to take a look?" Cukurs smiled, his passion for machinery overriding any sense of caution. He followed Seokwoo deeper into the warehouse, completely unaware that each step was bringing him closer to his final judgment. The memories of Riga were everywhere, though Cukurs did not see them. 30,000 Jewish lives destroyed by his own hands, families torn apart, children murdered, an entire community erased because of men like him. Seokwoo remembered the stories told by survivors, an elderly woman in Tel Aviv who lost her entire family, a man in Jerusalem who described watching Cukurs personally execute groups of Jews. Each story was etched into his memory, driving his mission. "Here," Seokwoo said, pointing to a corner of the warehouse. Cukurs moved closer, leaning in to examine what he thought was an engine. In that moment, everything changed. The first sound was quiet, a simple click that meant everything was about to happen. Cukurs turned, sensing something was wrong. But it was too late. Years of careful planning had led to this precise moment. Jae-sung watched from a distance, his face emotionless. This was not about revenge. This was about justice. A justice delayed, but never denied. Cukurs realized his situation quickly. Decades of survival, of hiding, of believing he had escaped consequences. All of it was ending in this moment. The Butcher of Riga would finally answer for his crimes. The team had discussed every detail. No torture, no long speeches, just a quick, precise execution that would send a message to other war criminals hiding around the world. Mossad's reach was long, and time did not protect monsters. Outside, Montevideo continued its normal evening routine. People walked streets, ate dinner, lived their lives. They had no idea that a moment of historical justice was occurring in a quiet warehouse on the city's edge. Cukurs tried to speak, to negotiate, to do something. But his words meant nothing. He had not shown mercy to thousands of innocent people decades ago. Now, mercy would not be shown to him. The operation lasted less than 10 minutes, clean, precise, calculated. When it was over, the team began their carefully planned exit strategy. Documents would be prepared. Their tracks would be covered. By morning, they would be different people, in different locations. Yoon-hee collected the final evidence. Photographs. Documentation. Proof that would be sent to historical archives, ensuring that Cukurs' crimes would never be forgotten. As they left the warehouse, Seokwoo felt something complex. This was not celebration. This was closure. A chapter of human suffering was being finally, definitively closed. The night absorbed their actions. The city continued to breathe. And Herbert Cukurs, the Butcher of Riga, was no more. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The news spread quietly at first. A brief report in a Montevideo newspaper about a missing mechanic. No immediate connections, no obvious links to something larger. But intelligence networks around the world began to whisper. Jae-sung watched, the initial reactions carefully. Mossad had planned not just an execution, but a message. Every intelligence agency would understand what had happened. No war criminal was truly safe, no matter how many years had passed. In Tel Aviv, survivors of the Latvian Holocaust heard the news with mixed emotions. Some felt a sense of closure. Others remembered the pain that could not be erased by a single act of justice. An elderly woman who had lost her entire family simply nodded when she heard about Cukurs' fate. The Brazilian and Uruguayan governments responded with diplomatic confusion. Officially, they would condemn the action. Unofficially, many understood the deeper meaning behind Cukurs' elimination. Yoon Hee had prepared extensive documentation, detailed records of Cukurs' crimes, testimonies from survivors, proof of his involvement in mass murders during the Nazi occupation. These documents would ensure that history would remember the truth. International media picked up the story slowly. Newspapers in Europe and South America began to piece together the details. A Nazi collaborator eliminated decades after his crimes. A mission of justice that crossed continents and generations. Xiak Wu had already disappeared. Like a ghost. He moved through different countries, his mission complete. The team had planned their escape meticulously. By the time investigations began, they would be impossible to trace. The Jewish community around the world responded with a complex mix of emotions. Not celebration, but a quiet acknowledgement that one more perpetrator of historical crimes had been held accountable. Justice, though delayed, had found its target. Diplomatic channels buzzed with quiet conversations. Some condemned the action, others understood its deeper significance. The hunt for Nazi war criminals was not just about punishment, but about preserving historical memory. In the years that followed, the story of Cukurs' elimination would become a legendary chapter in Mossad's history. A reminder that some crimes are too large to be forgotten, too significant to be left unpunished. Jae-sung reflected on the mission's larger meaning. This was more than just eliminating one man. It was about sending a message to the world. No, one who committed atrocities could hide forever. Time would not wash away their crimes. Survivors' testimonies became increasingly important. Each story documented, each memory preserved. Cukurs was gone, but the memories of his victims would continue to speak. International law struggled with the complexity of such actions. Was this vigilante justice or a necessary response to historical crimes? The debate would continue for years with no simple answers. The team knew they had taken a significant risk. An unauthorized execution could have created massive diplomatic complications. But some crimes were too large for traditional legal processes. In universities and historical archives, the story would become a case study. A complex narrative about justice, survival, and the long shadow of historical crimes. How a small team could track and eliminate a war criminal decades after his actions. Yoon Hee continued to document everything. Every detail, every moment of the mission would be carefully preserved. Historical memory was their most powerful weapon against forgetting. The world moved on, but some stories never truly end. Cukurs' elimination was a reminder that some crimes are so large they demand extraordinary responses. In quiet moments, the team would remember why they had undertaken this mission, not for revenge, but for those who could no longer speak. For the thousands murdered, for the families destroyed, for the communities erased. Years would pass. New generations would learn about these events. The story of the Butcher of Riga would become a lesson about human capacity for both incredible darkness and remarkable courage. Jae-sung knew their mission was part of a larger promise. Never again. Words spoken after the Holocaust, now given real meaning through their actions. The night absorbed their actions. The world continued to turn. But somewhere, in the memories of survivors and in the pages of history, justice had been served. One man's long-delayed reckoning was complete.